Tomb Raider, The Angel of Darkness, adapted from the novelization by J.R. Milward, based on an original story by A. Murti Schofield, with Adamm Khuevrr, with music by Peter Connolly and Martin Iverson. Episode 16.
In seconds, I was back in the corridor. The howls grew in volume. There was a crash of breaking glass as a swig lamp shattered an observation window ahead of me. I brought my gun up just as a chubby man scrambled through the hole, ignoring the cuts to his hands and body.
It's in! It's in! Help!
Too terrified to care, he bumped off the wall and spun off balance. But then, I saw the shape appearing behind him, snarling as it crawled free of the window. I took aim.
Get down!
The bullets didn't even slow it down. All I could see was a rangy silhouette and two fiercely glowing eyes that narrowed as the thing let out a bellow that shook my eardrums. I kept my feet planted, pouring shot after shot into the creature as it leapt and snatched a hold of the scientist's legs. Hissing, the shape withdrew further into the shadows, hauling the sobbing man with it. My ears rang with every burst, but I might as well have been shooting blanks. A bulb sputtered and exploded overhead, giving me a glimpse of what held him. Evidently, that carcass back at the lab had a bigger, uglier brother. The gun clicked empty. In the sudden interlude, the creature fixed me with those headlamp-glowing eyes and roared. Its prey gibbered and twisted in its grip like a beached fish.
Help me! Help me!
His screams intensified, barely drowning out the sounds of splintering bones and tearing muscle. The creature retreated from my advance, but was apparently unwilling to give up its prize. Its grotesque head swung left, right. Cursing, I slid another round into the gun just as the creature took a flying leap back through the shattered window. I dove after it, reaching for my hip. The man clawed at tables, chairs, anything to stall his captor's progress, and howled in fresh agony as the beast's talons sank deeper into his flesh, wrenching him free. Judging by the scientific instruments and charts, the room had once been just another laboratory.
Lux Veritatis!
The creature roared and leapt aside, narrowly missing the comet of searing fire loosened from my grip. My energies thrummed like an invisible rope between us, and I howled anew as I sent my golden companion whirling back to take the beast's head from its shoulders. Impossibly, it saw death coming and ducked. The scientist was dropped like a sack of potatoes. I felt the light swerve at the last instant to avoid his heart. With that microsecond's distraction, the beast jumped. It punched through a ceiling vent like it was made of tissue paper and scrambled out of reach. I roared, not willing to accept defeat, but in moments the creature's whip-like tail had disappeared up the shaft and vanished. My bullets traced a path across the ceiling, but it was too late. Light from my tame star circled us warily as I rushed to the dying man's side and assessed his wounds. Blood quickly soaked my hands as I applied pressure to the ruin of his thigh. The demon's claws must have severed an artery.
Don't. It's too late for that.
What the hell was that thing?
Proto, I thought I was safe in here. Don't bother, I said. I'm dying.
How can I kill it?
Boaz was right. Only a shark can destroy it. But it's too late. Everyone's dead and we don't have a shard.
One like this, you mean? The man's eyes widened as I withdrew the peri-up shard from my pocket. Its pull was to perception what black holes are to gravity, and I quickly slipped it back, hiding it from view. The room seemed to chill several degrees in its absence, although my companion continued to stand sentinel. The dying man's eyes followed its circling movements, and a hungry look overcame the pain on his face. His hands gripped my shirt with unexpected strength.
Kill it. You must kill it, but before it gets to the upper levels, you can't let it get loose. Understand? We failed. You can't let it get out alive.
Less than a minute later, I solemnly closed his eyes. Heat and light returned to my hand. Chirugai?
I know.
Any ideas, old friend? The glow faded, revealing a golden disc fitted to my palm. Curved blades retracted, quiescent. Well, it was better than nothing. I knew there was only one solution, but the thought stuck in my throat, no matter how hard I swallowed. After Rwanda, I'd vowed never to do anything this crazy again, but I saw no alternative. The beast was aware of me now. It would not risk another open battle. I was going to have to follow the creature into its own territory. Only there did I stand a chance of killing it. Stay with me, okay?
Assassination.
Grunting with effort, I managed to drag a steel autopsy table over to use as a stepladder to clamber into the vent. The table's half-dissected occupant remained reassuringly dead as I hauled myself up into the darkness. You'd think I'd be so used to the stench that I wouldn't notice one more corpse. Yeah, right. My sweat felt cold on my forehead as I pushed onwards. There was no movement of air, and wouldn't be until I got the power back on. Breathing slowly, I forced images of talons swiping out of nowhere to claw my face off, firmly to the back of my mind. Even as a child, I was cursed with too much imagination. The Legion had long despaired of beating the habit out of me. Perversely, my father had actually praised my gift, always maintaining that a good imagination was invaluable for scrying. The flip side, especially when crawling alone dark passageways looking for boogeymen, wasn't so great. I'm not exactly a big guy, but I'm no featherweight either. The vent was less than 3 feet square. Brushed steel bumped and thumped as I shuffled down on all fours, my breathing sounding horribly close. All I had to guide me were my instincts, the beast's unique, vomit-inducing stink, and the glow from the metal disc clutched in my outstretched fist. The light waxed and waned like a beacon in the darkness, growing in luminance and thrumming at each new junction when it sensed the direction taken by my quarry. At long last, a light pierced the shaft ahead of me. Ready for anything, I approached the opening and peered out. It wasn't quite what I'd expected. A vision from the Industrial Age, as Jules Verne or H.G. Wells might have envisioned it, arched away from me as a vast, enclosed sphere, like Cerebro's evil twin. Hey, I'm a Marvel fan. Get over it, DC. Armor plating covered the walls in a rusty, riveting patchwork, and a sturdy gantry encircled the circumference. A passenger jet could have fitted in the chamber with room to spare. Guess this was home sweet home. Warily, I emerged from the cramped vent, grateful for the chance to stretch my legs. Rust pattered down in a soft rain. The dust made a faint corona around each of the massive arc lights that were spaced at intervals around the perimeter. I could taste it with every breath, and feel it as a raw tingle at the back of my throat. Even my footsteps echoed with metallic overtones. The room was impressive all by itself, but my eye was irresistibly drawn to the object hanging at its center. A reinforced metal box, maybe 10 feet square, held immobile and isolated by dozens of steel cables from both above and below. A hermetic door, nearly 6 inches thick, hung pathetically off its hinges. Something had burst its way out with astonishing violence, and I didn't need to be a rocket scientist to come up with a likely suspect. So this is where they kept the Proto, till they lost power. Clever girl, Lara. You let the genie out the bottle. I nodded and gave the disc at my hip a gentle squeeze. My steps took me counterclockwise along the gantry to a small but heavily reinforced window, looking into what was clearly a control room. A safety glass had been reduced to a frozen spiderweb of cracks, where a man-sized object had struck with punishing force. One glance at the interior made me wish I hadn't bothered, but I quickly spotted that the exit door had also been breached. There was zero point in trying to lure the beast back in here. I wondered how it had originally been contained, and how many people had died in the process. There was no other direction that the creature could have taken, and so I pressed on, stepping carefully through the spilled gore. Evisceration is always slippery. The smell was appalling, but was soon replaced by the familiar reek of bleach as I emerged into an empty corridor. Bloody footprints cantered away from me, bouncing briefly off the wall as they turned a corner and disappeared. Following such an obvious trail would finish this game of cat and mouse in record time, except that I would probably be the one cast as the mouse. My father hadn't been a hunter in the traditional sense, but he had passed on his predatory instincts to me, along with a decent amount of cold logic. I wasn't going to get anywhere further by chasing this thing. The Proto was an active hunter, unafraid to ambush grown men and drag them kicking and screaming across a room. And the one thing you didn't do when tracking a predator was to back it into a corner. Not unless you were absolutely, totally confident that you could take it down. Unfortunately, I didn't have an army of spear carriers ready to hold the beast at bay while I hacked its head off, and my cloth shirt and fatigues wouldn't do squat against my enemy's weapons. Even the Chirugai could only do so much. Its attacks were surgical tools compared to the forklift truck I'd need to hold the creature off, if it decided to go on the offensive. Duh, Kurtis. If I wanted to kill this thing, I'd have to use my brain. Time for another reconnaissance. There was an alcove halfway down the hall. I hunkered down as far out of sight as possible, keeping my back pressed to the tiles, and concentrated. It took a few moments longer than usual to work up the proper focus, but after gritting my teeth with effort, I flung my awareness after the trail of glistening prints. To my mind's eye, the blood stood out even more sharply than the surrounding walls, glowing like neon down the ever-darkening passageways. Bodily fluids, especially those so intimately required to keep us alive, are rich sources of energy. Ask any vampire you like. If there's emotion involved, then that gets imprinted too. Kinda like topping off an engine with nitrous oxide. This blood had been forcibly expelled during an act of extreme violence, which made its signal even more charged up than normal. I shudder to think what scrying the beast's entire rampage would have done to my sanity. Those adepts I talked about don't just exercise their mental muscles for reconnaissance. They also have damn strong defenses to keep what they see from turning them into gibbering maniacs. The trail ran out, and I hovered at a junction. One corridor ended in nothing but pipes and a circuit breaker box, while the other sloped downwards and had a pair of double doors that were almost, but not quite, closed. When I moved to enter the room, the tension in my head grew almost unbearable. I tried again, only to run into that same gelatinous barrier. My attempts to breach it left me suffocating and disoriented. Whatever was in there was actively trying to keep me out. In a last-ditch attempt, I hurled every scrap of energy I had into a needle-fine probe, hoping to catch a faint glimpse of what was resisting me. But I misjudged and the probe shattered like glass. My mind was flung back and re-entered flesh with artery-bursting force. I doubled over, stifling a grunt as pain exploded behind my eyeballs. Fire danced before my eyes, and hot wetness trickled from the burst vessels in my nose. God, that hurt. What are you, my companion or my father? I had to check, and there is something down there. The risk was worth it. The Chirugai fell silent, but it was right. The act of scrying could be more demanding than the toughest physical workout. I'd been pushing myself hard for the past few weeks, and my endurance was approaching its lowest ebb. Attempting a difficult scrying, especially trying to circumvent that damn barrier, was a stubborn and moronic thing to have done in my present condition. If my probe had been any stronger, I'd have risked a stroke, or worse, from the backlash. I raked fingers through my hair, as though I could brush aside my fatigue. The pain was lessening, slowly, although I'd have killed for a Tylenol or 3.
Your father is dead. You must stay alive long enough to fulfill your quest. Avenge him. Avenge us all.
Only on very rare occasions do the Chirugai condescend to communicate with complete sentences. My fingers caressed the metal, and the thrill of heat was like a friendly hand pulling me to my feet. Nothing would beat eyeballing the thing in person. With caution, I approached the double doors, my boots making almost no noise on the polished floor. The sign and the faint whiff of formaldehyde confirmed that I'd reached the morgue. I froze. The light spilling from the narrow opening had darkened. Something was moving around in there. The shuffling stopped right on the other side of the door. My breathing grew heavy, and the weight of my pistol seemed to increase tenfold. I tried not to think of horror movies with knife-wielding murderers as I pressed my ear against the door, concentrating. The snuffling, huffing noise on the other side grew closer, deepening to a growl. I kicked the door in. As tactics go, it was a pretty safe bet. I met a heavy mass which let out a scream but staggered backwards, thrown off balance as I shouldered my way inside. But then it regained its footing and bore down on me with a swipe of scythe-like arms and a hiss on loan from a king cobra. Fortunately, I know how to fall. As I rolled, I loosened the Chirugai in a flurry of burning light and kicked at the thing's ankles. Talons longer than my arm impaled the ground either side of my head, and a face that was barely a face anymore thrust itself into mine. I had a vision of half-melted, frothing holes in place of eyes, and long spurs of bone protruding from a heavily bandaged jaw. Nobody could have missed a target at that range. My gun fired once, twice, 5 times before clicking empty. Every shot piercing the creature's skull and plastered globules of brain matter across the ceiling. The creature shook its head, as though dislodging a mosquito, and screamed at me. I'd only made it madder.
Jesus!
I ducked, barely missing its fangs, and aimed a kick between its legs. There, at least, I got results. The talons came free as the thing leapt away, its straight-jacketed arms flailing while it howled. Brains are one thing, testicles are another. On my feet, I backed out of immediate range. The room was fairly typical of morgues I'd seen, with the usual gurneys and refrigeration units occupying most of one wall. However, the upright specimen tanks, each twice the height and girth of a man and glowing with the sickly greenish light, or definitely not standard issue. The light threw ghastly shadows across my attacker, whose anguished groans had metamorphosed to a hiss of hatred. Its empty eye sockets focused on me. Dropping the gun, I dived to avoid another of those Widowmaker swipes and caught the beast smack in the solar plexus. I timed my kick almost perfectly. The thing snarled and jabbed straight down, narrowly missing my own precious equipment, but amazingly did not fall. The thing had to have the core muscles of a rhinoceros. It dawned on me that the beast's claw was now firmly lodged in the floor and had pinned my pants in the process. As if realizing its talon was stuck, the beast turned its rotting face back to mine and brought up its other claw for a killing blow. I closed my eyes, a sight of my own intestines not being high on my list of priorities, and prepared to die. At which point the Chirugai reappeared. I risked a glance in time to see the creature sag like a dropped puppet, its life suddenly as absent as its head. Preservation instincts kicked in and rolled my body aside as the corpse tumbled to the ground. I scrambled to my feet just as the Chirugai sailed back to me, steaming as it shed its coating of blood. Damn. My heart was beating double time as I scanned the room, alert for more of the creature's buddies. The corpse's crusted bandages could not entirely hide the fact that it had once been human. Spurs of bone and claws had been grafted onto or burst through his limbs and skull, and the exposed skin was the color of curdled milk. Veins stood out like worms across the ruin of his face and body. Jesus, what had Eckhart been doing down here? A prickling of the senses told me I was being watched. I lifted my gaze, ignoring the benevolent glow of the Chirugai. The specimen tanks by the far wall were all occupied with variations of the dead creature's theme, and threw ghoulish, rippling lights across the room. I squinted, trying to make sense of the tangle of limbs and spines floating serenely in preserving fluids. In the shadows, distorted by the curve of the glass, was a lean and hungry shape, topped with 2 glowing red eyes. Its growl was my only warning before it leapt. You know that moment people talk about, when life is supposed to flash before your eyes before it gets snuffed out by a horrible death? Those people must have been referring to car accidents or lightning strikes, because the attack didn't leave me the necessary nanoseconds to reminisce. The Proto struck with the force of a hit-and-run jeep. I was kicked off balance and slipped on the bloody floor. The creature's sheer momentum was the only thing that saved me. Through the throbbing pain, I heard it sail right over me and blow the doors wide open. Its claws clattered on the tiles, while it huffed and snarled like a wild boar. Furiously, I rallied my defenses, wincing at the dinner plate-sized dent where my ribs should have been. That creature had struck me with the heavy flat of its talons. My second miracle. Otherwise, I'd been sliced open like a ripe melon. Pistol out, I released the Chirugai and pelted after my quarry. It had recovered from its skid and stood crouched in the hallway, tossing its head and pawing the ground. Its claws gouged foot-long rents in the linoleum. Even from here, the beast's spiny gray hide stank of mildew and rot. I felt the Chirugai blurring the air behind me as it hovered protectively. The beast sensed it too, peeling back its lips to bare nightmare fangs. It took a step back, then another. In a flurry of thought, the Chirugai met the beast's dive head-on. I flung myself aside, avoiding a fatal swipe, and traced a line of bullets along its exposed belly. Impossibly, the beast twisted in midair. It landed on all fours, hissing and spitting, and spun to face me across the corridor. Sludge-like blood oozed from a mortal wound across its left eye, where the Chirugai had almost split its skull in two. Buzzing like a hornet, the Chirugai reached the end of the hall and reversed direction. The proto sized me up, its sides heaving, but impossibly free of gunshot wounds. Even as I watched, its cleaved head began to knit itself back together. With a wet slop, the blood clotted and a fresh eye regrew in the ruined socket. Okay, that's just not fair. The beast faced me and bellowed in part challenge, part frustration. For a crazy second, I saw intelligence glittering in its gaze. It knew that here was a genuine threat, something far more deadly than a battalion of Strahov guards. Maybe Alexis was right about me all along. Whether it was my butch display or the Chirugai plummeting back down the hallway, the beast did what I'd least expected. It fled.
Damn it!
Snatching my companion mid-killing streak, I dashed after the beast's retreating shadow. The Chirugai burned angrily in my fist, its desire for blood almost overpowering the will of its master. But I needed it with me, and refused to let go.
Not yet.
We rounded a corner, taking the down steps 3 at a time. Every breath stung from my cracked ribs, but I ignored them. The stairs abruptly ended, and I entered a chamber almost hidden under a pall of smoke and fumes. It was impossible to tell the room's dimensions, but fuzzy lights from various control panels winked through the twilight haze. The smell of diesel was strong enough to be a demon in its own right. My eyes wouldn't stop watering. For a moment, I couldn't believe my luck. Surely I hadn't come so far. The generator room. Before I could congratulate myself, a shape dropped out of the fog right in front of me. I hit the deck just in time to avoid the slashing teeth and rank breath. The Chirugai, still clutched tightly in my left hand, grew hotter and shone like a miniature sun. The proto turned, hissing at the intrusive light. Its eyes bored straight into mine, brimming with hostility. I swore, realizing too late that I'd gotten myself trapped in the proto's own lair. It hadn't fled. It had strategically withdrawn, luring me in like a first-week recruit. But then I grinned. Its trap was only as good as its ambush, and I'd survived the critical surprise attack. Baring my teeth, I crouched and raised the Chirugai aloft. No more running. It's just you and me, ugly. The beast screamed, a sound as primal as the darkness before humans tamed fire to hold the nightmares at bay. This close, there was no need to scry to feel the beast's aura. It was so strong that it warped the ether around it for several feet, appearing to my heightened senses as a cloud of churning, noxious corruption. The only thing holding the creature back was the light clenched in my fist. My presence forced the beast's instincts down contradicting paths. The hunger for living blood versus reluctance to approach that deadly radiance. Confusion fought with fury in the proto's swaying stance. It gnashed its teeth, whining like a dog, and began circling me. I matched it step for step, increasing its frustration as it sought an opening, and found none. The malformed creature was clearly not a true Nephilim, but there was enough of the fallen there to taint the beast with more than mere physical strength. A portion of their ancient malevolence towards humanity had also been instilled within the proto's twisted flesh and bones. Coupled to its uncanny regenerative abilities, it was something my training had stressed would mark the Nephilim out, no matter how they chose to disguise themselves. I prayed the Nephilim's weakness had been captured as well. My free hand strayed to my pocket. The creature reacted with a sideways feint, but I was already bringing my hand up as it charged. The Chirugai exploded. I had the impression of overpowering light, a radiance so strong that it took on physical force. Pain erupted in my shoulder as I felt the beast's ravening body forcing me down. But the Proto was shrieking, its attack fouled and blinded by the Chirugai's incandescence. And I sank the parry-up shard up to the hilt into the beast's misshapen skull. It yelped, a dog-like bark of shock and pain. I rolled out of reach as its body contorted in agony. The light of the Chirugai softened and embraced me, and we both stood clear to watch the beast endure its death throes. They did not last long. In the ensuing silence, my hand found the hilt and tugged the shard from dead flesh. There was very little blood, but I wiped the blade clean anyway. Like a freshening breeze, the pressure in my mind lifted. The ether cleared, all trace of the creature's diabolical presence vanishing like smoke on the wind. Even the murk in the room seemed to grow thinner before my eyes, enough for me to quickly establish my way around the generator controls. It took only a few minutes' work. Pursing my lips, I listened to the machinery as it hummed back to life, the indicator lights all registered in the green. I'd done it. I've got to ask for a raise. That's my demon quota for today, don't you think? It felt good to smile, and I stroked the gleaming metal disc restored to its rightful place at my hip. Yeah, I know. The work ain't over yet. My greater purpose was still unfinished. Eckhart still lived, and so did the Nephilim as the nightmare yet unborn. While the Proto's presence was already fading, my sight perceived the Black Alchemist's influence still saturating the Strahov like a diffused smog. Both were spewers of pollution and death, but the Proto had just been another bestial animal to be put down. Bringing down Eckhart was a far deadlier prospect. His skills and Nephilim-inspired gifts put him in order of magnitude more dangerous than anything I've taken on before. The Lux Veritatis notes indicated that he enjoyed the same invulnerability to mortal weapons as the Proto had so aptly demonstrated. It also went without saying that the rest of the damned Cabal and their agency-equipped lackeys were willing to die to protect their master. Just getting to Eckhart was going to be a challenge. If I didn't have all the shards by the time I faced him, my run of good fortune would certainly come to an abrupt and messy end. Yeah, I know. It's gotta be worth a try. She's probably wondering what's keeping me.
In episode 16 of Tomb Raider, The Angel of Darkness, Kurtis Trent, the Chirugai, and the Cabal scientist were played by Adamm Khuevrr. Written and adapted by J.R. Milward. Based on an original story by A. Murti Schofield. With music by Peter Connolly and Martin Iverson. Additional sound effects courtesy of www.freesfx.co.uk, the BBC, and the YouTube Audio Library. Produced by Stephen Milward. Lara Croft and Tomb Raider are the property of Crystal Dynamics and Square Enix.